Hi, IB students. This is Ryan Reagan, the founding partner of HKExcel, and today I'm with Leo. So, Leo is a graduate from the University of Cambridge who did the IB before, and he actually got an offer to work at Barclays, an investment bank, right? So, if you're interested to study in a top university like Cambridge and you want to get into the banking field, right, one of the top earning fields, I believe, then pay attention to this video because today we're going to talk about like how to actually get into such a top university, how to be successful in your future career. Okay, so this will be a very fruitful interview. Okay, so Leo, so when you applied to Cambridge, what so you had to submit your personal statement, right? Did you need to do an interview as well?
Well, the interview came after the personal statement stage. So
Okay.
you send in your personal statement for the application on UCAS, and then if you get selected for interview, then that's like the next stage. Some colleges do require you to go through some additional stages at the start before you're invited over for like the formal interview. But usually, including my college, like you do the interview as like a later stage.
Okay, so could you share with us how did you do your personal statement, and what do you think made your personal statement stand out? Because I think for Cambridge, the admission rate is very low, so obviously you had to do something to stand out, right? So what do you think that was?
I think so. First of all, like the personal statement selection stage depends on whether you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
For Oxford, the selection is much more tough. They will, eliminate most of the people at the personal statement stage, and they won't invite much people to interview. Say like 30 to 40%. At least that's how it was back then. For Cambridge, they're more lenient. If you at least demonstrate that you're an able student, which means if you're like achieving a 7, perhaps comfortably, in your IB subject, the subject you're applying for, and say you've demonstrated at least some kind of extracurricular interest, then they will invite you to interview, which is around like 70 to 80% of people get to the interview stage.
Wow.
So for Oxford, the first selection is more difficult, and then at Cambridge, the interview is where you differentiate yourself.
Okay.
Since I applied for maths, I think it was pretty straightforward. Like the personal statement is it's like a box they tick. They basically just check that you are someone who has demonstrated that you are not just following the syllabus. Like you are devoting at least a bit of time outside of your spare time to further your interest in that subject. So in my example, the stereotypical view of like a Cambridge math student might be like, oh, he's done a lot of competitions, he's won medals or whatever. But that wasn't really my case. I just told them how I, read a bit of maths books. I did IB further maths outside school, which is definitely not a necessary condition, but that helped my application. I also talked about how for Cambridge Maths, there is an admissions test called 6-term examination paper step. I talked about how I also try some of those problems in my spare time. And I guess that was good enough. Like, it really isn't much. You just need to say, because if you're applying to Oxford, you probably have a good enough UPG in the first place. So what you need to do in your personal statement is show them that, okay, I read some books about the subject outside school. Maybe in my spare time, I do some problems or stuff like that. And that's good enough. You don't need to do anything fancy.
Okay, so like going the extra mile, for example, for you, you mentioned you took an extra IB math course, right? I think that's quite a standout point.
Yeah, but that was like overkill. You definitely don't need to do that, especially since further maths is such a rarely offered subject at school.
Okay.
So I think even without it, I would have still passed the personal statement stage pretty comfortably. Yeah.
So in terms of ECAs, what kind of experiences in your personal statement do you think really was the most impressive in your opinion?
So my ECAs were not impressive at all. I didn't have anything like, I think I talked about one maths competition, which was just like a very small, within our school circle. Nothing like the IMO or anything like that, which is an international math Olympiad. Nothing like that. I talked a bit about volunteering, which is just, I assume some people will just do as part of the school curriculum. You do need to demonstrate that you're not just a complete nerd. Like you just do maths or something like that. You don't do anything else. It is important to demonstrate that you have a life outside your subject. Perhaps even talk about like the sports you do. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is I only had one experience related to maths, and it wasn't even that impressive. Others were pretty standard stuff, like volunteering, some like Model United Nations, which isn't even related to maths, and like a bit of the sports I did. Nothing special really.
Okay, so you mentioned the main process in which they select students is the interview, because 70% of the students get to the interview, and then from there maybe they pick like 10%. So can you walk us through your interview experience? Like, what kind of interview was it? What questions were asked? How you tackled it? How you prepared for it? Things like that.
Sure. So the interview stage is the biggest hurdle for. Turns out for Cambridge Maths, interview is the biggest hurdle because that's where 70% goes down to like 20 to 30%. And then afterwards it's the offer. And then if you have the offer, you just need to pass the admissions test. So I think this is the most important part. The interview stage is basically when they see you first time as like a person. And then what they really want to know is how you think. In a maths interview, what they would do is they jump straight into questions. During my interview, I didn't even get anything like, oh, why do you want to study at Cambridge? Why do you want to study maths? The first question I got was a maths question.
Really?
And then after, it was just maths questions on and on.
So that's quite strange.
Yeah.
So because if there's a math question, why don't they give you like a paper test? So because an interview is supposed to be verbal communication, right? So
yes.
So what do you think about that? So why would they verbally ask you a math question?
Yeah. So math questions, I guess some questions, the exam questions that you could do on a paper are very different from the ones that you can verbally ask. So the ones they verbally ask will be things like, I'll give an example. So
Sure.
like they might ask a question like, say you have a Rubik's Cube, and let's say it's not the usual 3 by 3 by 3. Let's say it's like 9 by 9 by 9. And then they would ask something like, if you color the outside of the Rubik's Cube all with the same color, and then they'll start asking you things like, how many cubes are colored on 3 sides? Like how many of those small cubes, of the 9 cubed small cubes, are colored on 3 sides, which is essentially asking you how many small cubes on the corners, and then how many cubes are colored on 1 side only, 2 sides only, how many cubes are not colored at all, stuff like that. And these questions are better if you talk to the interviewer about it. Like the most important part is to show your thought process. How I prepared for this was, if you literally just Google Cambridge Maths interview questions, there are a ton of resources online. And then I practiced with like a friend, or sometimes even to myself, however weird that may sound, to say my thought process out loud. Like I pretended someone was asking me how to solve this question, and I made sure that they hear every single step of the thought process, because that's what's important. Like it doesn't matter if you get the answer wrong. If you get the answer right, but you just said, oh, this is the answer, it's much worse than getting the wrong answer, but you clearly lay out what your thought process was. Like, perhaps these are the options. Maybe I'll try this, and that would make the interview like an organic one instead of like a dead one where you just like spit out answers, blah blah blah, and then they don't see any of your personality at all. So yeah, I would say if I were to just give one tip for people during an Oxford interview is to be clear about your thought process and don't be afraid of getting anything wrong, because that's the most important part.
Okay, so it's kind of like brain teaser questions, right? So just curious, when you were preparing for this interview, you tried to look up questions. The questions they asked you in the interview were the ones you actually prepared for, or were most of them were not expected?
In my case, most of them were not found on the internet. But
yeah, it's not expected.
The internet tends to, like, there's nothing like, the questions on the internet are much easier than reality. They're much harder than reality.
It's kind of similar level.
So they're quite similar, I would say, and then some are harder, some are easier, obviously. But it's a good indication, and obviously this applies to all subjects. Like even for a humanities subject like law, you can probably find questions online, and because you just need to tweak it. Like for a Cambridge law interview, they probably will ask you. The point is the questions will be open-ended, so they can lead on to a different question, and then depending on your ability, they'll go deep, and then they'll try to find where your limit is by asking you harder and harder questions. And then once they see where like your limit is, they'll be like, okay, that's like his thought depth and stuff like that.
Okay, so it sounds like they're not going to ask you things like why are you interested in Cambridge. It's all about like seeing how smart you are. It sounds like, right?
Maybe that was like an anomaly because my first interview was quite eccentric, quite weird. But I think actually the majority they would still like ease you in. It just turns out that maths is like a very hardcore STEM subject, so it kind of is more appropriate to do that. If you're doing like a humanities interview, for example, like law or history or something like that, I'm 100% sure they'll ask you, oh, why do you want to do history? What made you apply to Cambridge? And these obviously you would have prepared for, right? And you definitely should prepare for these standard questions.
Okay, so Cambridge is like the dream university, like it's on this pedestal, right? I actually visited Cambridge a few months ago, and it's like in this small town by itself, right? So can you share with us what some of your experiences in actually studying Cambridge? Like, for example, would you recommend somebody to go to Cambridge? Like, if there's an IB kid right now who is saying, "Oh, I really want to do whatever it takes to get into Cambridge," do you think it's worth the effort? And yeah, so how do you like the experience so far?
Yeah, I really enjoyed my experience. So Cambridge is like this kind of not really isolated, but it's like a somewhat countryside town, which means there aren't many distractions, and the environment really makes it clear that like, oh, you're here to study, you're here to maximize your academic potential.
Mm-hmm.
But the system is not for everyone in the sense that in say a different UK university, there wouldn't be things like tutorials or supervisions where you sit down with the professor or like a PhD student, 1-to-2, 1-to-1, and then you talk about homework problems. The attention you get definitely is like unparalleled at other universities. So which means if you don't get your stuff together, it will be very clear to whoever is giving you that attention that you're falling behind or anything, which isn't a problem. They will support you, but some people do find that that's very challenging. I obviously, if you're good enough to apply, or you think you're good enough to apply, definitely give a shot at it. But the system, I think the system works well, but it can be challenging to some. But obviously, everyone knows that when they're applying. Overall, it's very, very enjoyable, and obviously, the people surrounding you are, the best in their school, which motivates you to do just as well as them. But sometimes, I guess the competition and the comparison could make some people feel less confident, feel discouraged, or anything like that. But on the good side, obviously, it motivates you to be better, and you feel like you're with people who share your interest and whatnot.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you get very individual attention from your professor, right? Like the tutorials in a very small group. Because when I studied in HKU, I never got, in most universities, I think you don't really know your professor. But in Cambridge, it sounds like that's a very unique point. Like you get very personal interactions with your professors. Okay.
Yeah.
So so you mentioned like if you're falling behind, the professor would know. Do you have any classmates who actually got kicked out, like because they were just not good enough? Does that kind of thing happen?
So in my personal experience, none of my friends got kicked out, but I do know of some people who got kicked out. Not kicked out, I guess, but people who drop out themselves voluntarily. I would say, like, even though it's so, if you get admitted, you have to have passed the personal statement, the interview. You have to have passed STEP, which is a very difficult admissions test. So if you're there,
there's
you
an admission
probably
test as well.
you have to have been good enough. And if you start falling behind, it's not like they'll kick you out immediately. It's not like they're not lenient. They will give you every single chance possible. They will give you as much support as possible so that you can stay in the university. If someone is kicked out, it probably is like their responsibility, that because they definitely have enough resources. And even if you come last place in the exams or something like that, it's like to fail is, given the resources and time and everything you have, not many people fail. I'll say that.
Okay.
And I don't know anyone personally who have failed. If you got in, you probably have what it takes to get probably at least a 2-1, or something.
Okay,
like that.
so you mentioned there's a test. So is it for every subject for Cambridge there's an extra test that you have to do?
So for most STEM subjects, I know there are. For example, for maths, it's STEP. For medicine, I think it's called the UK CAT or something,
Okay.
CAT. And for the law test, there's also an admissions test, the law admissions test, LSA or something.
So how hard was the
Like,
test for you for the math test? How do you find it very difficult, or what is the difficulty level you would say?
the STEP test is one of the most difficult high school admissions tests in the world. The maths offer rate tends to be a bit higher than other subjects because the offer condition will usually include STEP, and because STEP is so difficult, it weeds out like half of the applicants.
Okay.
In my case, in our college, we had 18 people who received offers, and only 8 people were admitted. And among these 8 people who were admitted, only 4 people actually made their offers. So they let some people who didn't make their STEP offers in. That tells you how difficult it is, right? Because 18 people who got offers, only 4 people actually made the STEP condition, which is
So you
usually to
mean
get.
you can fail STEP and still get in?
Yeah, if they're in some cases, like I would say around a third of the people in Cambridge actually failed their offer for maths, for Cambridge maths, and still.
So it's definitely harder than Math HL at IB, right?
Oh yeah, of course, it's harder than. It's very difficult. It's like, it's not Olympiad style questions, but it's like as hard as, like within a syllabus, within a curriculum, questions could get.
So for STEP, is it like all the math and science students need to take this test for STEP?
No, STEP is only maths.
Only for
Actually,
math.
I spent the second half of my school year, of my final school year, just preparing for STEP. So I was comfortable with most of my classes, and in class, I literally, like, whether it's philosophy, physics, chemistry, I just did STEP problems in class. And
wow.
So that's the amount of preparation it takes. It's a very difficult test.
Okay. So let's get into your career now. So so I know so you're now working full time, right? At Barclays. Okay.
At Barclays, yeah.
Okay. So could you share a bit about how do you find working in finance? Because I guess a lot of high school students want to work in finance. Okay, right? So just share your experience of how you got into it. How are you finding the work? Things like that.
I'm quite surprised that high school students are already thinking about the career. I did not think about my career until maybe the start of the second year of my university. And it was only because my friends around me were starting to get internships and whatever. Yeah, I mean, starting in high school is probably maybe too early, but obviously starting early is better than starting late. So finance obviously is like a high effort, high reward field in the sense that you will put in longer working hours, higher pressure, and what you get is like you learn a lot. Obviously, the pay is high, and I mean, but if you think about it, if you divide out the hours, maybe it's not like much higher than other careers. I would say like finance is a field where you don't need to be like a math professor or very good at science or very good at history or anything like that. It really is like a people business where you have to be smart.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn things quick. And to be able to take the long working hours, the pressure, whatnot.
So if you don't mind sharing, just final bit. So what position are you doing in a bank right now? What are kind of your daily duties?
Oh well, actually, I just finished my training, so I actually haven't started my real working stuff yet. But last year I did an internship first. So how most people get full-time offers at investment bank is most typical route is you first do a summer internship, and then you receive a return offer. Nowadays, the pipeline is getting earlier and earlier. So now there's a thing called Spring Week, which is available for people in their first year at university. Right. So if you do well at your Spring Week, you'll get an offer for the summer internship, which in turn, if you do well at your summer internship, you'll get full-time. So I didn't do the Spring Week. I did apply for some, but I didn't get any. And in my second year, I started to get serious and applied for as many summer internships as possible. And I ended up receiving some offers, and I chose the one at Barclays. And I probably did okay at my internship, and that's how I got my full-time offer. It depends on whether you're going to UK or US, I think. At UK, it's less networking focused. In US, you definitely have to make an effort to reach out to people, talk to alumni at your school, stuff like that. In UK, it's a matter of making a good application, doing well at the interview, the assessment center, and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot for your sharing, Leo. So let's end our interview here, and thanks a lot for your sharing.
Yeah, no problem.